Welcome to the Nitro Show. I'm Streit. Before we dive in tonight, just a reminder, we have started our series on the 50 greatest Georgia players of the 2000s. Be sure to subscribe to the channel to get all the updates as we count down the greatest players of the 21st century. All right, so tonight we'll kick it off with rev share fallout. What continues to be the biggest story in all of the college football landscape is the NCAA versus House settlement that was finalized last Friday. Burl and I went live on Friday, kind of talked through some of the basics, but as more has come out, there's been more and more conversation over the last few days about what this means for college athletic departments, for college athletes, and the entire sports landscape as a whole. One interesting thing I saw that came out was the idea that maybe this ultimately leads to tanking in football. Tanking, you say, but college football programs don't draft players like they do in the pros. Well, tanking not in the same way that they would do it in the NFL. So when you look at the details about how the revenue sharing budget, that $20.5 million is allotted to the programs, the budgetary year runs from July to June. So that means that when you get to July every year, your budget amount starts over. This also means that the football calendar is split across two budgets every year because football season, as we know, the season itself runs, from the end of August until early January. But really, after January is over, you're kind of in a new season, right? And so if you spend all your money in July, buying up new players and everything, you're not going to have a lot of money to pay recruits at the beginning of the next season, right? So some schools could easily tank one season to save their budget and load up for the next year. So if a team has a glaring need at quarterback, they could tank that season and not spend money on a quarterback that year, but then kind of save that money out of their budget and go all in on a quarterback the next year. They could go ahead and do the deal before the season started in that spring time period before July, use its money to pay that recruit to come in or that transfer player to come in, and then still spend money on their team the next year to pay their players next year, essentially sacrificing the year before playing without a high prize quarterback because they knew the team was going to be better the next year. This is just the first way that you're going to see teams maybe try to manipulate these cap numbers over the years. It's just interesting to see a little bit of that strategy that you've always seen in the NFL about salary caps and spreading contracts around come to the college football world, but it's coming. Along with some of this rev share stuff, rumors that some schools are going to be spending exorbitant amounts to put better products on the field. The biggest one I've heard is that Texas Tech is potentially looking to spend upwards of $51 million on its athletics programs this year. That's insane. Everybody's going to be spending $20 million, or at least all your big programs, right? But over double that on athletics, that's nuts. Like even your big programs, some of them aren't going to be able to keep up with that. And heaven forbid you're one of these little schools with small athletic budgets. Like being able to raise $20 million will be hard pressed for your alumni base anyway. To be able to compete with schools that can raise $50 million in a single year. The whole thing about revenue sharing and everything was going to level the playing field. I just don't see it that way. These big schools that want to spend this money that have it are going to find ways to do it. And if you're spending $50 million on your athletic program, you better see results. And part of this whole revenue sharing thing and how the players are going to be paid, whereas before, currently, it was kind of done mostly through collectives, these groups of donors that have kind of popped up essentially as these separate companies that have handled NIL payments essentially to players. NIL payments not really for doing anything other than being on the team. But how are those collectives going to be handled going forward? If the schools are handling that essential pay for play element, what becomes of the groups that are going to help these athletes get additional payments outside of that $20 million cap? Well, Ohio State may have set the tone for what that's going to become. Today, they announced the formation of an in-house entity to handle its NIL. It's going to be called the Buckeye Sports Group, and it's going to be the primary NIL group serving Ohio State student athletes. It's going to be jointly run by their athletic association, along with Learfield, Ohio State Sports Properties, which I guess is their media partners, right? And, their main job is just to facilitate endorsement deals on behalf of their athletes, essentially doing away with their old collective and replacing it with this group that will, help them get car dealership ads and other things to be able to continue to pay players, even though the school may have already paid out its budget for the year. And of course, since the weekend, we've also got a lot more details on both the College Sports Commission as well as their clearinghouse that they're going to be using for NIL deals called NIL Go. It was much rumored on Friday, but it has been made official that they have hired Brian Seeley as the CEO of the College Sports Commission. His background, he was a former executive for Major League Baseball in their legal and operations department. He brings a wealth of experience in the investigative realm, and that's going to be key in his role. In this post-settlement era that we're in, the NCAA will no longer be in charge of enforcement of these rules. That's part of this whole thing, is the NCAA is really done. Other than, academic suspensions and other things, they're done being in the enforcement of player eligibility for payments and all that stuff. That's going to all be handled by this new sports commission. It is being totally run by the Power Four conferences. So the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the ACC are the ones behind it. All of their, all of those conferences are requiring that their schools in their conference sign up and join in, making sure that if they don't want to join up and abide by these rules and try to circumvent the payment rules and stuff, they're just going to get kicked out of their conference. It looks like this is taking shape, and this is going to kind of hold candle for what this group essentially under Brian Seeley is essentially the commissioner of college sports. They're not calling him that. He's the CEO, but that's essentially what he is. Some more details have come out on NIL Go. The website is up now live, so you can actually see what the process entails, as well as they spell out what their criteria is in evaluating NIL deals. So the process, it's a 5-step process, basically done entirely through the web. At first it might be the student athlete, but eventually, it's going to be representatives of those athletes, agents, or if it's these collective type groups or whatever, they're going to go through this process. They're going to upload the contract, the actual legal binding document, provide all the information about who the payer is, what their relationship is to the school, to the student, to the company that is providing the NIL deal. Then they have to provide all the deliverables. So that's, copies of plans on how this money's coming, when it's going to be paid, where it's coming from, who's funding it, et cetera, et cetera. And then they have to detail out all the compensation. So how much they're getting, is it contract? Is it X number of appearances? Is it a number of ads? Is it social media posts? Whatever it is. And then they have to confirm it and submit that all the information that's collected up and over for evaluation. So the evaluation criteria that the NIL Go is going to look at, number one is payer association. And that's the relationship between the payer and the student athlete school. So I think this is a way to try to get away from high donors just essentially buying kids. They're going to try to look at the actual relationship of the payer and the student athlete school. So if it's just Tom, who graduated 17 years ago and is an accountant and makes a lot of money and wants to pay to have X player on the team, I don't think those are going to pass the criteria. The next thing they're going to look at is the valid business purpose. And that's whether the payer is seeking to use the student athlete's NIL for a valid business reason. And that means to sell a good or to sell a service to the public for a profit. So it's just saying, hey, what are they doing? Are they promoting Jim's Taco Truck? Are they making appearances down at Main Street Chevy or whatever? And under that, they said that deals must demonstrate a legitimate commercial rationale. So the things that they list include evidence of using the student athlete's NIL to promote a good or service being offered to the public, and it has to be compliance with industry standard NIL practices. So within whatever the industry they're in, they have to make sure that they're sticking within their rules. So what if it's a large company, then it has to abide by its large corporation laws or things like that. The third piece of criteria that they look at is the range of compensation. And this is that real gray area, I think, that that's going to be a topic of a lot of lawsuits when this really gets going. And that's whether the compensation paid to the student athlete is commensurate with the compensation paid to similarly selective individuals. So if you're going to pay a student athlete $100 to promote your restaurant, would you also pay Tom the actor $100 to promote your restaurant? And Tom the actor might be, a famous person or whatever. That's kind of what it's saying, that it really has to be comparable. You can't say, oh, I'm going to pay this kid to, I don't know, post on social media that he likes my shoes, and I'm going to give him $10,000. Well, would you give somebody else $10,000 to do that? Probably not. The range of compensation is a deal level calculation, and it's intended to capture their unique NIL value. And it's based on a bunch of different factors, including the performance obligations, if it's tied to the student's athletic performance and social media reach, the size of the local market, and the market reach of that school. So obviously a deal for a school like Georgia may be more valuable than a deal for a school like, I don't know, Kennesaw State, right? A bigger program with a lot more alumni and a lot more money around it. Right? After the deal is submitted, it's going to go through the review, and it's going to be given one of three outcomes. The first outcome is that it's simply cleared, that the parameters of the deal are good, that the board says it's fine, the athlete's good to sign it, they're good to go, compete, get paid, whatever. The second one is flagged for additional review. And that means that the deal is going to need more information. It could be anything from concerns about who the payer is, the compensation amount, the contract terms. So in those cases, the College Sports Commission will help conduct an additional review and provide guidance to the student athlete on what they need to do to get that deal cleared. The final one is if the deal comes up as not cleared. And when a deal comes up as not cleared, it means that they have not approved it under its current circumstances for the athlete to take that NIL deal and receive money and still be eligible. In that situation, the student athlete has a couple different options that they can take. The first thing is that they can go back and revise the deal and try to resubmit it. They can work with the payer on the NIL deal and try to change the information behind it to get it cleared and resubmit it. The second option is they can cancel the deal. They can just walk away. Any money that they may have already received from the deal, they would have to refund it. But if they do that, then they're good and they can walk away. The last thing is to appeal and to go to arbitration. The neutral arbitration process is designed to, get outside of NIL Go itself. They assign somebody else to come in and review it, and they'll levy a decision. That's going to probably take a little bit longer. And so I think in most cases, student athletes and the schools and the people representing them will probably try to revise the deal and resubmit, because I figure that would be an easier process than having to wait and get an arbiter to come and look at it and then make a decision. So that's kind of how that process is going to work. I foresee a lot of gray area and a lot of lawsuits and stuff coming from this area, because while they do have, kind of defined criteria, and a lot of the conference commissioners are touting is, hey, they think they're going to be able to enforce this type of stuff, and they're glad it's giving guidelines. As we know with anything involving money, people are going to fight for whatever they want to get whatever they want. So we'll see what happens when this goes live in just a few weeks. So as these schools are looking at ways to start funding this annual $20 million and still have money left over to spend on other parts of their athletic department, such as new facilities, new uniforms, and things like that, the idea that private equity firms are going to start backing collegiate athletic programs is becoming a reality. A company called Elevate is creating the Collegiate Investment Initiative. It's an investment group that's purpose is to provide new funding sources to college athletic programs. And that capital that they provide, it's not really to go to pay for their revenue sharing. It's really designed to allow them to put forth money for capital intensive projects like facilities and upgrades and things like that, allowing these schools to focus their other revenues on the revenue sharing. And this is going to be important potentially for cash-strapped athletic programs that need some way in the short term to get money to be able to stay afloat, especially in the early years of all this NIL stuff. But there were also some rumors this week that there were some big schools potentially looking to get involved with these private equity firms as well. There were rumors that Penn State and UCLA were actually getting involved, and that was surprising because I look at those as very, very large athletic programs. But they kind of shot those rumors down, so it doesn't sound like they are quite on board yet. One that does seem like it might be on board is Boise State, but just, giving the shifting economies, the demands of the revenue sharing, these schools and athletic departments are going to continue to look for other ways to get money to fund projects like facilities, seating upgrades, stadium upgrades, and just all around improving things around their program. So we'll see how many more schools get involved with this type of thing. And if this becomes more of the norm, I'm sure there are some schools that won't have a problem raising money and continue operating as they do, but I think there's going to be a lot of schools that are going to struggle. So getting out of the revenue share and NIL world and getting back to looking at the product that's going to be coming on the field this fall, a couple of big rating indexes were released in the last couple of weeks that kind of give a prediction of what these statistic-based ratings think of the upcoming season. So the first one that came out was the ESPN College Football Power Index for 2025. Right there at the top, you've got Texas, number one, projected at 10.4 wins on the season. I saw that Texas is currently projected to have the weakest schedule in all of the SEC. So you definitely can see them winning at least 10 games fairly easy. And if they happen to get by a Georgia and beat Oklahoma and stuff like that, they certainly could easily win between 10 and 11 games. Now, interesting is the next two schools on the list. Number 2 is Georgia, coming in at 10.1 projected wins. And number 3 is Alabama, coming in at 9.6 wins. Those schools are all interesting because obviously Georgia plays both of them. The difference is they get to play them at home this year. So if Georgia can hold serve on those, it may change the fortunes of those schools around them. After Texas, Georgia, and Alabama, the next 3 schools are the 3 powers of the Big Ten. So you've got Ohio State in at 4, Penn State at 5, and Oregon at 6, followed by Notre Dame at 7. So, looking at it, with the exception of Alabama, those are all schools that were in the playoffs last year and all schools that are expected to be good again this year. And I fully expect that to happen. I do find it interesting that Georgia is ranked up at 2nd because it seems like kind of across the country, Georgia is not, I wouldn't say being disrespected, but they're just not being talked about at the same level as some of these other schools that are kind of considered the powers of college football. A lot of these lists have been coming out. Top defenses, top running back rooms, top quarterbacks, top this, top that. And you don't see Georgia on it very much. Or if you do, they're down at the bottom. But schools like Ohio State and Oregon kind of seem, in Texas, are kind of on all these lists. So it's interesting that FPI thinks Georgia is going to be a little bit better than maybe the collective rest of the college football world seems to think. Another ranking that came out was the KFORD rankings. What KFORD does is it presents the points per game above FBS average. So it really presents a power rating. So number 1 in their rankings, same as ESPN, was Texas at 29.6. So that means essentially that they would be 29.6 points better than the average team. Number 2 again was Georgia in this poll as well at 28.6. And number 3 was Ohio State at 28.5. If you look at the top 7 in the KFORD rankings, it's the same 7 teams that are in ESPN's. The only difference is this has got Ohio State and Alabama flipped, but everything else is the same. So these kind of 2 statistical-based preseason rankings are kind of in step, not necessarily in step with what you've seen from other people across the country. So we'll see we'll see how that plays out once the season gets started. So last thing I want to touch on tonight here on the channel, we are doing the top 50 Georgia players of the 2000s because we've had 25 seasons here in the 2000s. It's a good time to take a look back at the players that have made Georgia great. ESPN, in a similar vein, released its top 25 plays since 2000. And it's a fun list. So let's talk a little bit about what they thought were the top plays of the 2000s and, what plays that I think may have been missed on there. So number one they listed was the kick six, arguably is the most famous play, at least of the 2000s. Everybody kind of knows where they were when they heard about the kick six or saw it. That was at the end of 2013. That was the same day that Georgia played Georgia Tech and went to overtime, the Todd Gurley kind of takeover game in overtime. Just a crazy play in a crazy rivalry, a bunch of crazy fans. And I would agree that's probably one that deserves to be up there. Number two on their list is kind of one that I think is a little bit higher than most people would think, though it was definitely kind of a great, really series of plays. And that was Boise State running trick plays in that Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma. Boise State got into that game, serious underdog. They were down by a touchdown late in the game. They ran a hook and ladder play that they went and they took for a touchdown, got the game into overtime. And then in overtime, they ran in a 2-point conversion on a Statue of Liberty play to beat Oklahoma. Just a crazy, crazy moment that put Boise State on the map. They became a power, more or less, a power team from a small conference for the next, 5 years after that. It just kind of announced that, hey, some of these smaller schools through good play calling and senior players and things like that can compete on the national stage. The third one on here was Vince Young at the end of the Rose Bowl, the national championship game against USC, a game that he was absolutely dominant. And just one of the best games I've ever watched, that Rose Bowl national championship game. But Vince Young would not be denied, running in that final touchdown to give Texas the victory. A single great performance in all of college football history. Just a guy that couldn't be stopped. Number four, man, this one hurts. Some people call it Tua's toss, but I think it's best known as 2nd and 26. National championship 2018 from the 2017 season, Georgia, Alabama in overtime. Georgia's taking a 3-point lead in overtime. First down. Georgia gets a sack of Tua Tagovailoa. It's backed up. Bama's field goal kicker's already missed 2 field goals in the game. 2nd and 26. They're back on the 41-yard line. Georgia fans are thinking, okay, keep them short. Don't let them pick up yards. They'll miss the field goal. We'll win the game. And they throw a deep pass to Devontae Smith for a touchdown. Our hearts were broken. My heart was broken. I was in the stands. It was a great play. At the end of a crazy game where Georgia absolutely dominated in the first half, and Nick Saban made the ballsy call to take out Jalen Hurts and put into and it worked. And Georgia missed out on a national championship, and it would take another 4 years for them to get a shot. Just a heartbreaker. Number 5 on their list was Appalachian State beating Michigan on a blocked field goal. That was a crazy game because Appalachian State was a 1AA school and Michigan was a top 5 team in the country heading into that year. Now, you'll remember that Appalachian State was like either back-to-back or 3-time defending FCS national champions coming into that game. So it wasn't like they were the slouch of the FCS programs. They were the best. But that Michigan team had a lot of senior players on it. I think that was Mike Hart was their quarterback, Mike Hart was their running back, and Chad Henne was their quarterback. And they were expected to do a lot, and it got them off to a bad season. They didn't have a bad year, but they weren't a national title contender that year. So that was their top 5. Like I mentioned, number 4 was painful for Georgia. Another play that came in at number 7, Georgia was also the victim of, and that was the prayer at Jordan Hare, Georgia-Auburn game. Auburn ended up playing in the national championship game that year because a couple weeks later they had the kick 6, but Georgia had taken the lead. Auburn was heavily favored in that game. Georgia came into that game with not a great record. They were really banged up, and Aaron Murray had willed the team down, and they'd taken a touchdown lead, or they'd taken a lead late in the game, and it was a 4th down and long. Nick Marshall, who had started at Georgia as a cornerback, had transferred and now was playing quarterback at Auburn, heaved up a pass. Looked like it was going to be an easy interception for the two Georgia guys, but they kind of went up and batted it up and knocked each other out of the way, and it fell right into the Auburn receiver's hands, and he ran it in for the game-winning touchdown. Georgia did get the ball back and drove down the field, but were unable to score, and Auburn won. And it's just crazy to think that, you know, in the last 25 years, Georgia, unfortunately, was the victim of 2 of those top plays. A couple of personal favorites as a Georgia fan that weren't on this list, and maybe they should have been, maybe they shouldn't, but number one's the hobnail boot play, strictly for Larry Munson's call. But that play was also the day that Georgia kind of announced it was back as a national championship caliber team. Kind of had fallen on dark days after Vince Dooley had retired in the Ray Goff years and never really lived up to the talent. Mark Richt was in his first year, and Tennessee was a top 10 team in the country. Georgia on the road got a huge victory, and it kind of just propelled the program in the right way. And eventually it led to ending the national championship drought and where the program is today. The second one was Sony Michel sending Georgia to the national championship game in 2017 in the Rose Bowl in overtime. After Lorenzo Carter had blocked the field goal, all Georgia needed was a field goal to win the game. And we ran the wild dog, snapped it to Sony, and he took it to the left and ran it in the end zone, sent Georgia to a national championship game in Atlanta. That was cool. And then the last one was Keeler Ringo's pick 6 to seal the national championship, picking off Bryce Young. You know, Georgia was only up 8 when that happened, so Alabama still had a chance to go down the field and score a touchdown and get a 2-point conversion to tie. And Georgia fans had seen it so much, right? We thought, no way. There's just no way. Something's going to happen. They're going to get the touchdown. We're going to lose. And then Keeler Ringo caught the ball and ran it all the way back. And as Chris Fowler said, Georgia has finally toppled Alabama. It was a great day for Georgia fans, and one of our greatest plays, maybe not nationally seen as a top play in the last 25 years, but definitely one for the books for us. So that's it for tonight. Once again, be sure to subscribe to the channel, get all the highlights and all the updates on the 50 greatest Georgia players of the 2000s. But until next week, I'm Streit. Go Dogs.